All right, and welcome everyone to this special episode. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Along with me, we have Paul Stamets, an ambassador for the Fungal Kingdom. Paul, thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much. Honored to be here.
San Francisco, California, Singularity University's Global Summit. What brings you to the Global Summit?
Well, the singularity that people don't realize, or most people don't realize, is that we are descendants of fungi. We were born from fungi. 650 million years ago, fungi gave birth to animals. And so many of these mushroom species are much older than we are. We were basically little voles at the time that mushrooms had their true forms, many of them. And so mycelial networks, multicellular organisms, the first evidence of a multicellular organism has been found in lava beds, and it is of mycelium. And so the multicellular organisms, when they came to land, to land in the form of mycelium, these fungal networks, the fine little threads. Anybody can go out right now, find an old piece of wood on the ground, tip it over, and see mycelium. It's virtually everywhere. Under a single footstep, you can have more than 400 miles of these fungal networks. In a single cubic inch, they can be more than 8 miles. Now, think of this. The largest organism in the world is a mycelial mat in eastern Oregon, 2,200 acres in size. And it navigates through a very microbially hostile environment. In a single gram of soil, there can be more than 1,000 species of bacteria and literally millions of microbes. Yet the mycelium navigates through, and indeed it sets up the microbiome in the ecosystem. So once people understand that fungi and these mycelial networks are the foundation of the food web, they consume rocks, they release minerals to plants, they pair with plants in mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizal associations means plants and fungi come together, and they give the plants the ability to absorb more nutrition and to resist disease. And the microbiomes of the beneficial bacteria are set up by these fungal networks to help the biodiversity of the ecosystem. And so they are deterministic because they have a vested interest in the survival of the ecosystem that creates the plants, that grows the trees and the vegetation that then fall and decompose and feed the progeny, the descendants of fungi. So they are deterministic in the evolution of habitat. So the singularity is that we are descendants of fungi. Fungi have been here a lot longer than we have. They're network-based organisms, and we know about how important networks are, the computer internet, the brain networks. Right. And so understanding that our origins come from this wellspring of these fungal networks should give us pause to think about how we can preserve the very foundation of the ecosystems that give us life. Reinvesting in fungi is a very, very wise investment. With all this technology at this conference, we can't literally lose sight of the complexity and the inherent wisdom of nature. And the more that we deforest and destroy the ecosystems, the more we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And we can have the most great computer technologies, but if you don't have air to breathe, clean water to drink, or food to eat, good luck on your iPhone and your Droid when the ecosystems collapse.
Right. Well, Paul, with this conference being so focused around tech, AI, a ton of capital and a ton of investors here investing in this new technology for their businesses, is there a lack of funding towards the fungi kingdom? And should there
absolutely.
be more?
There's only 50,000 mycologists in the world, approximately. I believe that mycology should be funded equal to the computer industry because it's so fundamental to our survival. And people wonder, well, how these fungi affect us? Well, we just published an article in Nature, Scientific Reports. We may, hopefully, have a solution to colony collapse with bees. Bees are dying off all over the world. 1 of every 3 bites of food that you consume comes to you because of bee pollination. Right. Wild bees are dying off in a way that we can't hardly even calculate, but the honeybees, I have 10 beehives. When you have colony collapse, you go out on Monday, your beehives are fine. You go out on Thursday, all the bees are gone. And it's because a group of viruses being spread by the Varroa Destructor mite. And this Varroa Destructor mite was introduced in the United States around 1984. Originally came from Asia, but it's like a dirty hypodermic syringe to the bees, and it's putting a slew of viruses into the bees that now are shortening their ability to pollinate. Bees used to fly. When you see bees on a flower, it's the last 9 days of their lives. And they go and they pollinate up to 1,000 flowers a day. But now bees, rather than flying for 9 days, are only flying for 4 or 5 days. So that means 4,000 or 5,000 flowers per day, 4 or 5,000 less almonds per day,
Right.
cherries, apples. I mean, it goes on and on. So because of this debilitating virus, coupled with pesticides, loss of habitat, deforestation, factory farming, glyphosates, interferes with the microbiome. This is an unfortunate perfect storm of stressors. And see, life and death and health and disease is a series of coefficient multipliers, factors. It's a multifactorial equation, life is. And you have these stressors and coefficients. Then the end of the equation is health or disease, longevity or dying, much quicker than you should. And so what we have found, and we publish in scientific reports, that this amadou mushroom, that my hat is made from this mushroom, reduces some of these viruses. Yeah, it's a wood conch.
Oh, okay.
And some ladies in Transylvania made this hat. And you can put this mushroom into ash and water, and after a few days, it delaminates into mycelium. So this mushrooms are made of mycelium. Mycelium makes mushrooms. The mycelium is the root of the mushroom, like the roots to a tree. The mycelium is the roots of the mushroom.
Okay.
And so these mycelial networks navigate for hundreds of years, and then may produce a fleshy mushroom that comes up and disappears in a few days. So it's the proverbial tip of the iceberg, with these underground networks, seemingly invisible, but not invisible to those of us who know. Walk out into nature. Realize that under every footstep you take are miles of mycelium. The mycelial networks are alive. They're creating the soil webs. We are benefiting from the consequences of healthy mycelial networks. The viruses that are reduced by this mushroom that we publish reduces the viruses, in one case, 45,000 times. With one treatment, extracts put into the extracts of the sugar water that commercial beekeepers feed. Now, this is an extraordinary result. And we're able to demonstrate, and the reason why our Nature Scientific Reports article to this day is in the top 1% of all scientific articles ever downloaded in the Nature publication ecosystem, is because we're able to demonstrate a natural product has a broader bioshield of benefits than a pure pharmaceutical. That's because of the complexity of nature, the complexity of our immune system. And so it appears it upregulates immune-enhancing genes, which then secondarily and consequentially enables your immune system to fight pathogens, including viruses.
And that's been a big discussion at this conference, is how connected everything is. And you were just referring to the bees and like the parasitic symbiotic relationship with that. Climate change affects ecosystems as well. How can mushrooms work with us, and how can technology help mushrooms to create and strengthen that mutualistic symbiotic relationship?
Well, the good thing about technology is like the invention of the microscope. Now with cloud computing, with nanotechnology, with the ability to be able to take big data, we're looking at now the big data in the ecosystems. When you have 1,000 species of bacteria in a gram of soil, more than 8 miles of mycelium in a cubic inch, the intermolecular communication channels that are occurring, creating these guilds of a multi-special ecosystem, boggles the mind in terms of the computational complexity. And so I think big data is struggling to catch up with nature. The hubris of humans is thinking that we're smarter than nature.
Right.
And that we can, and all this technology is going to save us. None of this technology will save us unless it is invested in the natural systems. So I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, but going to Mars, are you friggin' kidding? You're going to a prison who has no ecosystems, where people are going to have enormous psychological issues. They're going to look at that beautiful blue planet in the distance and wish that they were there. We shouldn't leave this planet. I am all about space exploration. I love it.
Right.
And I think terraforming other planets with fungi will be a great way of creating new satellite Earths, around the cosmos, or helping condition those already existing Earth-like planets to be human supporting. But we need to really look at the intelligence and complexity of evolution. I want to redefine Darwinian theory. It is not the survival of the fittest. It is the extension of generosity of surplus to other members in the ecological community to build biodiversity. So it's not the individual that survives, it's the community that cooperates that survives. And these are enormously wealthy people here, and many people listening here can't even imagine that the wealth of people who are at this conference. I think it's imperative that they reinvest in the commons. The best way to reinvest the commons from a commercial mindset is to understand by reinvesting in the commons, you will have greater profits, not only for yourself, but then be able to give those profits to the commons. So that's something I'm really passionate about.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I can sympathize with that, because I grew up in the Northwest, obviously, full of nature. I'm always out in the trees, and I can appreciate that. So when we think about our impact on the environment and society, I personally am impacted. Do you think that's a problem nowadays, that people aren't as immersed in the environment and kind of look the other way and look towards technology and things like that?
Yeah. I hike in the old growth forest a lot.
Yeah.
I hike in the Cascades and the Olympics.
Beautiful.
And there's astonishing the drop off and the number of people hiking in the old growth forest and in the Olympics and the Cascades compared to 30 years ago.
Right.
30 years ago, we encountered lots of people. Now, the number of visitors, I'm sure there's some metrics on this, has declined drastically, because if people don't get an iPhone or signal or a Wi-Fi signal, they're addicted to their devices to the point that they've been distracted from enjoying experientially and spiritually nature. So just like the movies like The Matrix and other movies that have come out, there's one movie, I don't remember the exact name of it, but there's a beautiful a wall, and you think it was a window of waterfalls and mountains. And then the electrical field got disturbed, and you saw it really static, and it was a screen. Right. And there's a person living in a polluted, super urbanized city in a small, tiny apartment like in Shanghai. When the nostalgia of nature was being provided on the video screen, but it showed that the human need to be in contact with nature, unfortunately, was not being met by, quote unquote, the real world. And instead, there was a VR world, a virtual reality world, that was trying to appease those receptors that I think all of us know that we need to get back in touch with nature. So.
Well, I'm going to change subjects on you. We had a big section on mental health and the opioid crisis. Talked a little bit about it yesterday with you. And from what I've learned is opioid addiction, there's no one-size-cure-all solution, but it has to be managed, whether it's pre-exposure, exposure, withdrawal symptoms, inpatient or outpatient recovery. But I did read a study in the Wall Street Journal. It said psilocybin or LSD, I don't know the scientific name of it, had like a 40% success rate. Are we misunderstanding the health uses of psychedelics, I guess?
We have, because of a cultural prejudice. And, in the 60s, there was a cultural revolution, basically. The environmental movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the psychedelic movement, and the birth of the computer, internet technology. Yeah. All those were co-occurring at the same time. And unfortunately, when you have a powerful tool that is not put in the hands of responsible, experienced citizens and leaders, it can be abused. So the psychedelic medicine research was set back a lot. Timothy Leary popularized it, but he really unfortunately sabotaged a lot of the legitimate research. There's some great things to say about him. And there's a lot of things that retrospectively, I think he himself would recognize that there would have been a better path had they kept it within the medical community. Also, our society lacks the rites of ascending into adulthood. And these initiation rites in indigenous cultures, when a child becomes an adult, there's a very specific initiation rites that have been have traditions. Unfortunately, us and Americans, many of us from Europeans are displaced. We are not the first peoples. The first peoples of this country understood this very, very well. We are a displaced population that unfortunately has become, quote unquote, divorced from many of the rituals that helped us ascend into adulthood, into the greater wisdom. The psychedelic plants and medicines were very much a part of that in many indigenous cultures. So the problem in the 60s is that we didn't have those traditions, we didn't have those rituals, we didn't have experienced leaders. So inexperienced leaders, then unfortunately, because of ego and popularity and also the counterculture rebellion against authority, all these things unfortunately sabotage the legitimate use of these psychedelics. Now we are looking at the opioid crisis. My son is an opioid addict.
Same with my brother. Yeah.
My son is vacationing in prison right now. Okay?
Sorry.
And he is not ready to try psychedelic medicines. Many addicts are. So I think kind of personally, and I should indeed be careful, but I reserve the right to treat my family and my son with what I think the best medicines that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the opioid crisis is pandemic. It is so harmful. Psychedelics are not addictive. You take a psychedelic mushroom experience, and most people who haven't done this don't know this, but the next day, if you see the mushrooms on the table, you go, no way, I'm not touching those for a long time, right? A lot. I'm going to process it for a while. So they have no addictive potential, but they rewire the biochemistry of the mind temporarily. There's an opportunity, coupled with professional therapy, to change the biochemistry of the mind and to have in a sense, rebooting the mind. And that's why Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, is very, very epicentered on that concept. And so, thankfully, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA scientists, have looked very, very critically at the science without prejudice. And they've come out with statements saying this is the least toxic, most powerful psychotherapeutic drug they've ever seen. In the toxicology studies, these things are virtually non-toxic. But they have a tremendously powerful experience temporarily. Now, I have done many of these psychedelic drugs. I experience and go on a journey with mushrooms maybe once a year. Nature provides, I don't. So make that very clear. I had a DEA license or covered by one for about 10 years. I've published in 4 new species in the genus Psilocybe, the psilocybin mushroom genus. And so the use of these mushrooms therapeutically is opening up a door to be able to save society money and harm reduction. Now think of if your brother, my son, how much is the prison paying to house him? What is he contributing to a society? His court dates keep on getting delayed. Anybody who's gone through the court system knows this well. It's extremely inefficient. Delay after delay after delay, resources. Our taxes are paying for those resources of basically a dysfunctional system. If you got a 4 to 6 hour experience and change that person, and your brother, your sister, your daughter, your father, your mother, your brother, can be reformed as a responsible citizen, are you going to argue me that your ill-informed prejudice against psychedelic mushrooms is something that you should not try? When you look at the societal benefits, the return on the investment, the benefit-reward ratio is so high. Now, to be clear, you mentioned 40%. Some other addiction profiles are 25%. But that's still better than any drug out there that's been approved by the FDA for being able to help addicts. And so this is something we all live in the commons. We're all hands on deck. We're all in this mothership together. Right. Whether your mothership is your family, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's your village, your city, your state, your country, or this planet, we're all echoes of the health of the minute. And if we cannot solve internally the problems within our family, then there's many other families that are sharing those problems, and that reverberates out into the matrix of human existence.
Many other families. I know plenty of other families. I don't think I know one friend that doesn't know someone that hasn't been affected by this.
My hat's off to the Republicans who have woken up, because they have this personal problem within their families, and they are coming on board. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, has received several grants and approvals now with the FDA for PTSD. They strategically, Rick Doblin and his great team really went to try to help veterans with PTSD because the Veteran Administration, is looking for solutions. They're apolitical. They want to find solutions for the veterans. And so they opened up the door. But in a secondary conversation I heard with FDA regulators and scientists, when they were approached about psychedelics for PTSD for veterans, the FDA scientists stopped them and said, no, this is not just about veterans. This is about rape victims. This is about child abuse. This is about anyone who suffers psychological abuse. Now, I know very intimately that when you're abused as a child, you have lifelong issues that you have to deal with. I know several personal friends that are dealing with issues, and I've seen them dealing with these issues for 20 or 30 years. They have not been resolved. What these psychedelic medicines do, and psilocybin mushrooms in particular, because the experience is short. The problem with LSD is 12 to 14 hours. And when you do LSD, for me, the next day I felt over. With psilocybin mushrooms, the next day you feel younger,
Got it.
It also, interestingly, conforms to an 8-hour workday for the psychotherapists and the doctors. They clock in at 8, they go out at 5. Well, you can give a patient psilocybin mushrooms at 10, and they can walk out of the clinic at 4 o'clock, right? So they have this life-changing experience, but it actually conforms to the workday. Right. So it's also very, very helpful in being able to be integrated into medical practices. So now, to be clear on this, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, a number of other universities, you can go on the net. People should get a good medical advice. They should do this in a clinically acceptable medical setting, and they should follow the rules and not break the law. I'm absolutely squeaky clean. I'm an expert on psilocybin mushrooms, but nature provides, I don't. One of the very important things in my life that I realized is I don't give psilocybin mushrooms to anyone because I don't want to be responsible for your trauma.
Right.
You're going to go through a trauma resolving experience. You're going to relive your trauma and then come to reconciliation. That's a lot of work. That's not my job. And I don't want the responsibility of somebody having, I'm responsible for their experience. So I have enough issues of my own I'm dealing with,
Sure.
So that's why it's really important that this is, we create the structures in modern society with our best technology and the wisdom of science to be able to maximize the benefit in a way that we don't drop the ball on this. We don't fumble the ball, because if we do, then this will set us back into what happened in the 60s and 70s with the Timothy Leary, and then we lose this huge opportunity.
Right.
But when you get 25%, 40% of these patients then being able to break their addictive cycles from one experience, and they don't have to do it again, I think that brings to society an enormous emotional, economic, and political benefit.
And I think that's important because it's important for our viewers to know you're not making a pitch. You're not trying to give people mushrooms, like you said. Yeah. Nature provides, you don't. And that's important to know going in, and that's important that you're saying that. That's the message that needs to get out there, because people that have a strong opinion about, say, I'm a pharmaceutical company, like, I'm not going to say my farmers are bad. I'm going to give you more pharma for your pain. And that's what I think was so difficult when the medical examiners or the medical field came out and said, let's treat pain. Now the average diagnosis to give someone an opiate prescription is 13 seconds. You got back pain, here you go. It's creating this opioid problem, especially for my family members and others. And to touch on your points about the struggles and things, it's all connected.
It is. My girlfriend is a pain doctor. Yeah. She's a medical doctor. She actually works in a hospital clinic environment. Yeah. It's been so interesting to her, to me, to learn from her about pain. So much of the inflammatory cycles become resident within your inflammatory pathways of your body. So actually, you can actually have an injury and have chronic pain, but the pain cycle pathways become resident. And even though the injury may have gone, the patients are still experiencing pain. They are experiencing real pain even though the injury has resolved because the inflammatory pathways have been set up metabolically, and how do you interrupt those? So that's really well, you can mollify them with opiates, but that doesn't resolve the inflammatory pathways. And so what's really interesting is the potential of psilocybin mushrooms and these other compounds to allow you to interrupt the inflammatory merry-go-round that you're on. And you can break that cycle.
Huh.
And once you have a new pathway established, the inflammatory pathways are no longer resonant, and so much of this pain becomes psychological. And as my doctor friend has told me, these patients are really experiencing it, but we know it's psychological. And if we can break the psychological entrained reaction, then biochemically, the body can go back into homeostasis.
Right, because when you take a drug, isn't the brain just like flipping a switch? It's not really actually like the drug itself. Isn't it the brain just controlling everything?
No, I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
But I appreciate the nuance of your thinking. I mean, again, it's hard to paint the canvas with one brush. There's many doctors watching this that would say, oh, it's much more complicated than that. But
yes, not a doctor, not going to pretend like I'm a doctor.
But and even with my friends' patients, there are some patients that she's been unable to help. And there's inflammatory viruses, there's illnesses that can be resident within your own body's ecosystem that may not be evident. And so there could actually be a cause and effect relationship that's beyond the psychological merry-go-round that I mentioned.
Okay.
So pain is a broad umbrella of a symptom that has many root causes.
Got it. Colorado, I don't know if they decriminalize or legalize psilocybin, but what would you like to see going forward in 4 years?
Well, I think decriminalizing nature, the Oakland movement, makes perfect sense to me. I've long believed, how dare humans have the hubris to outlaw a species? Come on, give it up, right? And these mushrooms have been here longer than we are.
Right.
We are descendants of fungi. We're going to outlaw our ancestors?
Yeah.
I mean, that is so antithetical to the origins of our own biology. But what they did is...
That's actually crazy to think about.
It is. It is absurd. I don't want
that point to go unnoticed. That's really interesting. We're nature.
Yeah. And would you make the memories of your grandfather or grandmother illegal? Would you make your grandfather illegal? Well, how many generations do you want to go back?
Right.
So the exciting thing about the field of mycology and the why that I come to these conferences is that I've opened up the mindscape of many smart people who realize that this has been hiding in plain sight. It is so fundamental to our existence that for us not to know this at this stage, we are truly Neanderthals with nuclear weapons. And unless we become more responsible citizens on this planet, we will be ejected out of this biosphere as a pathogen. And so now the planet will survive. I have no doubt about that. Fungi and bacteria will survive. But will the ecosystems have the ability to sustain human existence? Right now in the cities, we depend upon the farms. We depend upon the forests. We end up urbanizing this entire planet. The life support systems collapse. And even though Elon Musk is a great genius, you are not going to be able to get the complexity of nature to create the life support systems on the scale that we have today. We should consider the Earth as our sacred library and laboratory. We should use the Earth biome as a library and laboratory to be able to replicate it on other planets. We lose that library of knowledge, we cannot transport that information into the future.
Well, Paul, as an ambassador of the fungal kingdom, what advice do you have for leaders around the world?
Most important, simplest thing to do, I think, is for people to plant trees, to take their children in the walks into the forest, celebrate decomposition, let wood rot. When you have a storm or a tree falls down, give up the concept of the Elizabethan highly manicured yard. It's that neighbor that's down the street that has debris and brush. Nature likes highly fractalized niches at different orders of magnitude that gives complexity to the habitat so the microbiome and the diversity of the organisms can thrive within that ecosystem. We need to free frame our thinking that decomposition is bad. I'm going to decompose, you're going to decompose, you're going to decompose. We're all part of this biomolecular matrix that streams through time. We need to celebrate and own our decomposition because we give and create the soil for future generations.
Paul, well said. Appreciate your time here on the Real Leaders Podcast. Talked about a lot. Talked about the diversity of the fungal kingdom. We talked about its effect on drugs and addiction. And we talked about what leaders need to know and what some of the misconceptions about the fungal kingdom. Appreciate your time here on the Real Leaders Podcast. For Paul Stamets, I'm Kevin Edwards telling you all to keep it real.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.